This week, Netflix dropped another installment of their Fear Street trilogy. While I feel Leigh Janiak's film series will definitely go down as a highlight in horror this year, seeing the first two films back to back highlighted some good and bad points in this series. I'll delve into both after this. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Fear Street Part 2, 1978 is new, streaming on Netflix. It's directed by Leigh Janiak and written by Zak Olkewicz, Leigh Janiak, Phil Graziadei, from the book series by R.L. Stine. Fear Street tells a three-part tale spanning three eras, 1994, 1978, and 1666. The town of Shadyside has had a curse hovering over it for hundreds of years. It seems to attract serial killers and mass murderers, much to the dismay of their snobby neighbors in the burb of Sunnydale. The horrors trail back to the 1600s when a young girl named Sarah Fier, played by Elizabeth Scopel, was hung as a witch, but not before she laid a curse on the town. When we last left Fear Street, Dina, played by Kiana Mediera, had to tie up her possessed girlfriend, Sam, played by Olivia Scott Welch, and sought help from the sole survivor of another massacre from 1978, C. Berman, played by Gillian Jacobs. Part 2 picks up right where we left off after Dina and her brother Josh, played by Benjamin Flores Jr., pay C. Berman a visit. Berman tells her story where she survived the Camp Nightwing massacre. This is where we are introduced to sisters Ziggy Berman, played by Stranger Things' Sadie Sink, and her older sister Cindy, played by Emily Rudd, who couldn't be more different than each other. Ziggy is rebellious and tough, while Cindy is eager to fit in and aspires to leave Shadyside behind her. When the nurse at the camp flips out and attempts to kill one of the other counselors, Cindy and some of her friends attempt to investigate what set her off, leading to an underground cave system and a room full of witchy paraphernalia. When another counselor becomes possessed by Sarah Fier's curse, he becomes the sack-masked killer from the first film and begins slaughtering kids and counselors alike. Meanwhile, Ziggy struggles with bullies at the camp and meets Sunnyside's future sheriff, Nick Good, played by Ted Sutherland. With Cindy under the camp trying to stop the curse, Ziggy is running for her life from the sack-masked Axeman rampaging through the camp. Fun stuff. And while I enjoyed this installment a skosh less than the first installment, I feel Janiak was able to catch the look and feel of the late 70s in Fear Street Part 2, 1978. The attention to sex, drugs, and bullying certainly were major parts of the teen films of that era, and while I don't think it captures the mood as accurately as the first film did, everything looks and feels in line with the intended era. Still, because plenty of films have exemplified the late 70s, it doesn't feel as fresh and fun as Janiak's version of the 90s. I feel that's where her passion really lied in that first film. I was surprised at the amount of sex this film gets away with. Much like the use of suicide in the first installment, Janiak really doesn't shy away from horror tropes, even though some subject matter feels taboo in this PC era we all live in. Simply seeing kids having sex felt risky, as if, again, someone might complain about the sexualization of teens, even though it's been a part of film history for ages. Janiak once again litters Part 2 with a great soundtrack, exemplifying not only the mood she is going for in the scene, but the more reckless era of the 70s itself. That said, while the scattershot soundtrack feels more appropriate in the MTV-addicted 90s film, I wish 1978 would have slowed things down a bit. One song leads to another, which leads to another, as if the films has to have a super sound of the 70s playing in the background at all times. There are occasional moments that work incorporating the sound, but I feel that Janiak could have benefited from studying the pace of some of those 70s slasher films and allow this film to take its own time. Much like Part 1, this second part has a very rapid-fire edit from start to finish, giving very little time for the film to slow down and just enjoy the moment. Let a song play out from start to finish, why don't you? It got to the point where it felt less like an engaging soundtrack and more like an impatient person flipping through radio stations on a long car ride. It'll be interesting to see what Part 3 does with the soundtrack, as Janiak won't have popular music to fall back on to strike an immediate tone and feel for each scene. I feel the first Fear Street had this feeling of everything coming at you all at once. You had an engaging cast of characters, an interesting situation, and a plethora of evil monsters pursuing them. For the most part, Part 2 only has the Axeman as the lone monster, and it lessens the scope and it makes the stakes feel much lower. The kills were fun and gory. The Axeman really does rampage through, killing kids and adults alike with reckless abandon. He's a creepy-looking villain, and this is basically one of the better Friday the 13th films that was never made. But this series feels like it peaked at Part 1, and while I'm interested in Part 3, the second installment felt more like filler between the more consequential stuff in the first and last films. That said, Part 2 had a wonderful cast. Sadie Sink is an extremely talented actress. Just from seeing her abilities evolve from Stranger Things to this film, it's apparent she's going to be a star to watch. I also really thought Emily Rudd did a great job as Cindy, conveying a likable and complex character as the older sister who wants to get out of the shade of shady side. And though I hated her short hair, Ryan Simpkins' Alice was great as the Hellraiser, who takes quite a bit of a beating and still keeps fighting all the way through. Still, this film really did nothing to advance the main story, as Dina, Sam, and Josh simply sat and listened to the Camp Nightwing massacre story, and I felt the throughway connecting all three films was rather thin and uneventful. I'm enjoying this series, but I hope Part 3 delivers the same energy of the first installment and less of the redundancy of the second. Right now, it could go either way. I'll see you next week when our cast is de-incarnated as late 1600s era participants in the witch trials. What'd you guys think of this second installment? Did it impress you? Let me know down in the comments. That'll be it for today. Please chime in down below in the comments and let me know how on the nose or mind-numbingly wrong I am, or you can counter with your own review. So guys, you know how YouTube works. I'd love to be able to dedicate more time to this channel. I'm not monetized yet, so if you want to help me out, remember to hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below. Want some spooky comics to read? I have 2 new horror comic book trade paperbacks you should look out for. Both Gravetrancers and Pirouette, collecting never-before-published issues, can be found in only the finest of comic book shops. If you're looking for written reviews, you can find them on my website, mlmillerwrites.com. If you really want to show your support, I also have a Patreon page at mlmiller. Look for the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for your time, and take care.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your